Howdy, folks. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn. And today for you, I'm going to do a bit of a Veterans Day special. As because I am a veteran myself, I figured I'd take time and actually share a story from when I was in the service. Now, admittedly speaking, this is not going to be a very glamorous story. I kind of felt like I'd go with the complete opposite direction and kind of give you a good example of embracing the suck. So, I served as a tank crewman when I was in the service, served on M1A1 tanks. And during one weekend, unfortunately, we were assigned to doing a training exercise over a weekend. Okay, that's fine. We got the tanks from the motor pool. The tanks were transported out into the field by the motor pool crewmen, which that's fine. That actually cut a lot of bullshit out of what we had to do. We didn't have to transport the tanks ourselves. However, there was one problem. The tanks didn't have locks on them. So essentially anyone could climb up on the tank, hop in, and drive off. And unfortunately, the motor pool crewmen left for the weekend after they transported the vehicles out to the field. So we had to pull guard duty. Now understand, folks, this was late October. And the weather was very weird at the time because in the daytime, it was quite warm. It would reach 70, 75 degrees in the daytime, roughly, that I recall. And that's mostly what I packed my gear for because at night, it was getting freezing cold. It was getting 30, even lower than 30 some nights. I think actually that night it was around 28 degrees. And it was windy. And it had been raining that whole week. Now, it didn't rain that night, thank God. But it pretty much been, it's wet, it's damp. The air's damp. The air's cold. And unfortunately, the mighty one here pulled a short straw and had to pull guard duty on the tanks overnight. And now it wasn't the only one. There was a couple of us. But yeah, essentially there was three of us that was assigned to guard duty on the tanks. And it got to like fucking 28 degrees. And it was wet and it was damp. And it was cold, and there was frost on everything. And the tops of the tanks, we got this. We could at least sit and lay down on the tops of the roof of the turret. But yeah, it was cold. It was bitch cold. I had a sleeping bag. That's all I had. We got out there about 2,200 hours, which is about 10 o'clock p.m. And we were out there. The three of us was out there until it was 0600, roughly 0600, 0630, when the other guys of the unit showed up. Now, luckily, when they showed up, Cooks brought out some hot chow for us. So, hot chow, hot coffee. Thank God for small favors. Because that was definitely a really rough, really long night out in the cold without proper cold weather gear. Because none of us actually was packed for cold weather gear. We had our field jackets with us, but like myself, I actually had pulled the liner because essentially during the day when we were training, most of the time, basically my BDU blouse and my field jacket was enough to keep me warm, especially when I was doing activities. But when it drops to 30 degrees. A BDU blouse and a field jacket is not good enough to keep you warm. Of course, I only had BDU trousers. Of course, I had my combat boots. Now, these were BDUs. These were like I'm not sure, 100% sure if they were M81. I believe they were M81 BDUs. So that way people can get in perspective of what these things are. Now mine were the cold weather version, which basically the only difference between warm weather and cold weather is the material is thicker on the cold weather. But they're still not meant for 30 degrees. So embrace the suck. We were out there all night by ourselves. And it was definitely a long, long night. Trying to sleep on top of a tank. Now, that's not the first time I had to sleep on top of a tank. I've slept on tank turrets multiple times. Now, that was actually my first time I had to sleep on top of a tank, which that was not fun because that was, it's steel. It's depleted uranium steel alloy. It's not comfortable by any stretch of the imagination. The sleeping bag itself didn't add much padding. The sleeping bag itself, it was a sleeping bag, but it was actually a warm weather sleeping bag, not a cold weather sleeping bag. So it wasn't meant for 30-degree temperatures. Once again, it was not meant. Basically, my point is we had nothing to keep us really warm. And it was fine. We made do. And then, like I said, guys got out there. I think it was about 0630, which is 6:30 a.m. for those who don't know. And the cooks came out with the crew in a Humvee, and they brought us, some hot chow in the hot food containers. We had eggs and bacon, and some toast, which, well, unfortunately the toast was cold, but whatever. At least the butter was melted. And they brought out hot coffee. Let me tell you what, I've never appreciated eating hot food in the field more than that morning. That was a definite embrace the suck. And what I do have to say about that is it really makes you appreciate the little things, gives you a real perspective of, little things like that, because I was anticipating that the guys were going to be coming out with MREs for us, because I knew as soon as the guy showed up, we were hopping in the tanks and driving off. And that's essentially what happened is the cook showed up. We got our hot chow, which was real nice. Once again, it was real nice. I can't say how much that was real nice. And I got to say, if so happens any of those cooks are sitting here watching this video, thanks very much. I know I said thank you then profusely, but the hot coffee really hit the spot. And that was like the first thing. I didn't even go for the food first. I went for the hot coffee first. Yeah, we got the platoon leader gave us time to eat real quick. We ate our food real quick. We hopped in the tanks, and then we trained all day in the tanks, and that made for a long training day. Because I tell you what, by about 2 p.m., so we're talking 1,400 hours, I was pretty fucking beat, because it was, like I said, it was a long, cold night. So yeah, there you go, folks. Sharing a story from when I was in the service. Nothing glamorous, but it was definitely an embrace the suck moment. So I think the reason I'm sharing this story, a lot of veterans, they talk about, I see a lot of stories about veterans talking about combat stories where they share a funny story of when they were in the service. And I'm sure maybe you guys got a bit of chuckle out of my misfortune, have to be out in the cold without cold weather gear. But I did want to share that story. I picked that story to share today on Veterans Day because I did want to put in perspective for people too that not everything in the service is glamorous. Most of your time in the service is not very glamorous at all. I could share many other stories, but I think that's the one I'm going to go with for today. Maybe next Veterans Day or maybe Memorial Day or something like that, I'll share another story from when I was in the service. So anyway, folks, keep in mind that, the service, most of the time, actually sucks. It really does. It's a lot of hurry up and wait, standing around. And then you have the real embrace the suck moments like that one. And I'm sure there's many veterans who could either share similar, I bet you every veteran, go to every veteran, I bet you any of them could share a very similar story of just embrace the suck, because, it's not always glamorous. Anyway, folks, thanks for taking time and watching my video and hearing my story. Just want to say, take some time, think a veteran that you do know, and I also want to take some time and thank the veterans, the past and current serving military members, myself personally, because, honestly, veterans and active service personnel really doesn't get enough credit for the shit they have to go through. But Yeah, there you go. That's the story I'm going to share today. Thanks again for watching, folks, and have yourself a wonderful Veterans Day.